Karen Stitt was just 15 years old when her life was brutally stolen. On a warm September night in 1982, she left her boyfriend's side near a bus stop in Sunnyvale, California. She was on her way home, just another teenage girl heading back after a quiet evening. She never made it. The next morning, her naked body was found just 100 yards from that bus stop. She had been raped and stabbed 59 times. For 4 decades, her murder haunted the community. No suspects, no arrests, only grief, silence, and unanswered questions. But in August of 2022, everything changed. After 40 years, investigators finally had a name: Gary Ramirez, a 75-year-old man living in Maui, Hawaii, arrested and charged with the murder, rape, and kidnapping of Karen Stitt. The arrest was made possible by a modern tool that's solving some of the country's most difficult cold cases: forensic genetic genealogy. Ramirez had never appeared in any criminal databases. His DNA wasn't in CODIS. He had no known criminal history. What led detectives to him was science, a careful reconstruction of a family tree built from public ancestry databases and the DNA left at the crime scene. Back in 1982, the evidence collected included blood and bodily fluids, but the technology to identify the person responsible simply didn't exist. As the years passed, generations of detectives picked up the case, followed leads, tested the evidence again and again, with no result. Then came the breakthrough. In 2019, Detective Matt Hutchison of Sunnyvale's Department of Public Safety got a tip. Using forensic genealogy, the investigation narrowed in on 4 brothers from Fresno, California. Through traditional police work, one by one, each was ruled out until only one remained: Gary Ramirez. In April 2022, the Santa Clara County Crime Lab confirmed it. Ramirez's DNA was a match. 4 months later, he was arrested at his home in Hawaii. The news hit Karen's family and friends like a wave, shocking, overwhelming, and strangely bittersweet. Michael Calhoun was Karen's former boyfriend. Now an adult, he remembers her not just as a girl from high school, but as his first love. He still has the copper ring she gave him when they were together. The day he returned to school that fall was the day of her funeral. For him, the arrest brought tears, chills, and a kind of relief that words struggled to explain. He had stayed in contact with the cold case detective for years, even after moving to Las Vegas and joining law enforcement himself. Every September, he would post a tribute to Karen on Facebook, just to keep her memory alive. Now, decades later, he watched as the man accused of her murder was finally identified. Others felt it too. Karen's aunt, Robin Stitt Morris, said the arrest reopened old wounds, but also brought peace. Soon, she said, we'll be able to write the end to this painful chapter of our lives. The case made headlines, not just because of the brutality of the crime, but because of what it represented: a life cut short, a mystery that wouldn't let go, and the relentless drive of a detective who refused to let Karen's story fade. When Ramirez finally appeared in court, now 78 years old, he walked with a cane. His long gray hair and glasses made him almost unrecognizable from the young man he had once been. He sat silently in court while the people who had loved Karen spoke. Her best friend, Tracy Lancaster, stood before him and asked the question that's lingered for decades. Why? Michael Calhoun told the court there would never be true closure. Karen was gone. Nothing could bring her back. But he hoped Ramirez would receive the maximum sentence under California law. He doesn't deserve to have the sun shine on his face, Calhoun said. Ramirez ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. In exchange, other criminal enhancements were dropped. He was sentenced to 25 years to life, the maximum allowed at his age. He may one day be eligible for parole, but for Karen's loved ones, the hope is that he never sees freedom again, where Detective Hutchison, who followed the case to its resolution, said the key to solving it wasn't just new science, it was persistence. This case had to be solved, he said. It was something that wasn't available to the detectives back then. But it was available to me, and I had to use it. District Attorney Jeff Rosen said it best. Over 40 years ago, Karen Stitt lost her life, but she was not forgotten. Today, thanks to a dedicated detective, a persistent prosecutor, and our crime lab, the person responsible is behind bars. Karen's family and friends say the pain will never fully go away, but they can finally breathe, because the person who took Karen's life no longer gets to run from it. The fatal stabbing of Sherry Black, a 64-year-old rare book dealer and mother-in-law of Utah Jazz CEO Greg Miller, sent shockwaves through the South Salt Lake community. Found brutally beaten and stabbed inside her quiet bookstore on November 30th, 2010. The murder was sudden, violent, and deeply puzzling. Despite physical evidence left at the scene, including the killer's DNA, the case remained unsolved for years. With no apparent motive and no suspects, it quickly became one of Utah's most haunting cold cases. Sherry Black lived with her husband, Earl, in South Salt Lake, where they shared both a home and a business, B&W Billiards and Books. Their shop, located next door to their house on 3466 South 700 East, specialized in rare books, especially LDS-themed titles, but also sold unique items like custom knives and pool tables. For Sherry, the bookstore was more than just a business. It was a labor of love that began as a way to cope with personal loss. After losing her son, Sherry turned to book collecting as a source of comfort and purpose. What began as a personal interest soon blossomed into a full-time career. Her brother, Jim Wakesee, described how she would visit local thrift stores every morning, hunting for valuable editions that she could resell online. Over the years, her collection grew so large that she and Earl had to expand their home just to accommodate the inventory. According to friends and family, she was a quiet, kind-hearted woman, someone who preferred staying behind the scenes, deeply devoted to her family and her books. On the morning of Tuesday, November 30th, the bookstore opened as it usually did. But the details of that day remain unclear, and investigators were unable to confirm whether the shop had been open to customers or if anyone else had visited in the hours leading up to the crime. Just before 2 p.m., Earl Black walked into the store and discovered his wife's body. She had been violently attacked, stabbed multiple times, and beaten. He immediately called the police. South Salt Lake officers arrived quickly and secured the scene. The brutality of the crime was evident. There were signs of a physical struggle, and a large amount of blood loss pointed to the ferocity of the attack. An autopsy later confirmed that Sherry had suffered multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma. A unique Armani exchange belt, size 36 to 38, was recovered at the scene. It featured AX on the buckle and the number 323 on the inside, details that investigators hoped might help identify the killer. Police moved cautiously through the crime scene, aware that the smallest piece of evidence could be the key to solving the case. Forensics teams collected everything they could, including traces of blood believed to belong to the attacker. Detectives later revealed that the killer likely injured his hand during the assault, leaving behind his own DNA. In the early days of the investigation, the police had little else to go on. They appealed to the public for any information, urging residents to report anything they may have seen between 8 a.m. and 1:45 p.m., the critical window before Sherry's body was found. And authorities also reviewed Sherry's personal and professional relationships, but uncovered no known conflicts. Friends and family were stunned. No one could think of a single reason someone would want to harm her. One lead from the past, however, did raise questions. In early 2009, nearly 2 years before her murder, Sherry had unknowingly purchased stolen rare books from a young man named Lauren Nielsen. The books had been taken from Nielsen's father, a leader in a local polygamous church. When confronted, Nielsen admitted the theft and warned his father not to involve police, referencing his ties to the Juggalo gang. After learning the books were stolen, Sherry returned them to authorities and cooperated fully. She was devastated by the incident. Although detectives confirmed the story and interviewed Nielsen, and they did not announce whether he was ever considered a suspect in her murder. As time passed, the case stalled. There were no further public updates and no arrests. Despite the DNA evidence, police did not disclose whether there had been any matches in national databases. Without a suspect, motive, or witnesses, the investigation went cold. Years later, investigators made a public appeal, revealing for the first time that the killer's DNA had been collected. They emphasized that the attacker had injured his hand, leaving behind a trail of blood. With this new push, police offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Sherry's daughter, Heidi Miller, spoke at a press conference, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She talked about her mother's love for books, her quiet strength, and the deep pain her family continued to feel. "I miss my mom so much. I can't even explain the pain I feel," she said. "We miss her every minute of every day." Her plea was simple but powerful. "If you have any information, please help us. If the person who killed her is listening, please turn yourself in." Despite the renewed attention and the release of forensic evidence, the case remained unresolved for several more years. But in October of 2020, that changed. Investigators finally announced the arrest of Adam Antonio Durbarow, then 29 years old. His DNA was matched to the evidence left at the crime scene. Authorities didn't reveal how he was first identified, but confirmed that forensic evidence had led directly to him. After 10 years of unanswered questions, Sherry's family had a name, and finally, an arrest. In October 2021, Durbarow pleaded guilty to aggravated murder. It was a confession that brought resolution, but also reopened old wounds. During the sentencing in April 2022, Durbarow, now 30, sat in court wearing an orange jumpsuit and a black face mask. His shoulders were slumped as 7 members of the Black family gave statements, one after another, describing the impact of Sherry's murder on their lives. They spoke through tears about who Sherry was and what her absence had meant. The court sentenced Durbarow to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The moment brought with it a measure of justice, but no sense of finality. As Heidi Miller once said, "There will never be closure, but there can be peace." Sherry Black lived a quiet life, built around family, faith, and the books she loved. She wasn't famous or flashy, but her story mattered, and for more than a decade, her name was a reminder of the work still left to do. Now, after all these years, the person who took her life is finally behind bars, and the people she left behind can begin, at last, to breathe a little easier. 16-year-old Fawn Cox was raped and murdered in her bedroom while her family slept just downstairs. It happened in July of 1989 in Kansas City, Missouri. For over 3 decades, her case remained unsolved, haunting her family, her neighborhood, and the police who investigated it. Now, more than 30 years later, the mystery has finally been solved. After decades of silence, investigators finally had a name. Donald Cox Jr., Fawn's own cousin. He was 21 at the time of the murder. His identity was confirmed through DNA and forensic genetic genealogy, the same investigative technique that helped solve the Golden State Killer case. Back in 1989, The case stunned the community. Fawn had come home late after working a shift at Worlds of Fun amusement park. She spoke briefly with her parents and went to sleep in her upstairs bedroom on East 9th Street. The next morning, her alarm kept ringing. When she didn't turn it off, her mother and younger sister went upstairs and found her body. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Her nightshirt was still on. There was no sign of forced entry, and the family hadn't heard anything overnight. Investigators believed the killer climbed through her second-story window, possibly using a truck parked outside. The sound of running air conditioners may have masked any noise. From the beginning, the investigation was intense. Police arrested 3 local teenagers and charged them with murder. But there were problems. DNA from the crime scene didn't match any of them. One teen was held for 8 months before being released. Charges were dropped, and the case unraveled. Fawn's family was devastated. Her sister, Amber Gonzalez, later described how the case consumed her life. She was hospitalized from the stress, obsessed with finding answers. "She was my protector," Amber said. "I wanted to be just like her." Still, there was no progress. Over the years, Fawn's parents and siblings fought to keep the case alive. They worked with police, put up billboards, raised money, and asked for tips. Local bus driver Monty Clark, who drove near the family home, even began his own research, determined to help solve the case. In the early 2000s, crime lab scientists developed a suspect DNA profile from the bodily fluids recovered at the scene. It was entered into CODIS, the National Criminal Database, but there was no match. Whoever had done this had never been arrested or convicted of a felony. Then, and everything changed. In 2019, Detective Matt Hutchison revisited the case. Using the then-new tool of genetic genealogy, investigators compared the suspect DNA to publicly available ancestry databases. This allowed them to build a family tree. The results narrowed the field to 4 brothers from Fresno, California. From there, traditional detective work began. Each brother was investigated and ruled out until only one remained, Donald Cox Jr. Though Cox had died in 2006 from a drug overdose, a blood sample from his autopsy had been retained. When tested, it was a direct match to the DNA found on Fawn. It was official. The case was solved. The news brought a powerful wave of emotions to Fawn's family. Relief, disbelief, sadness, and pain. "I never thought I would live to see the day," Monty Clark said. "Now I know the answer, but it doesn't feel like a good resolution." He, like many others, had hoped the killer would one day face justice in court. But Donald Cox was already gone. He had lived among the family for years, quietly carrying the truth with him. Amber Gonzalez called it a betrayal. "That had to take a lot," she said, "to be around a family that they murdered their child." Even now, unanswered questions remain. Investigators believe there may have been others with knowledge of what happened that night. Whether anyone else was present or knew the truth and stayed silent remains a possibility. But the identity of the man who violated and murdered Fawn Cox is no longer a mystery. More than 30 years after her life was taken, the truth finally emerged. DNA confirmed that the killer was her cousin, as Donald Cox Jr., a man who had sat at the same family tables, shared in birthdays and holidays, and carried the secret of what he had done. He died in 2006, never facing charges or justice in a courtroom. For Fawn's family, it's a complex kind of closure. Her sister Amber calls it bittersweet. "There will never be full justice," she said, "but we finally know who did this to her. We finally have her answer." This case stands as a powerful reminder of what science, persistence, and hope can do. And for the Cox family, after decades of silence, grief, and waiting, there is finally peace in knowing the truth.